Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 1, and this is session 57. There was something that was sitting in the notes last time that I did not get to cover at all in the session, and those sessions went over. Both of those sessions went a good bit over, and so I just want to just say it and bring it to your attention. It was when we were looking at those verses over in the book of Ephesians, and he talked about that now under the principalities and powers in heavenly places might be made known by the church the manifold wisdom of God. And that next verse says, according to the eternal purpose which He purposed in Himself. And what I wanted to say about that is, when God originally put the angels in charge of that government up there, the principalities and powers, because of His eternal purpose, it is my understanding that even though we didn't start out with the body of Christ in charge up there, that it was God's intention to put His wisdom into men that would eventually surpass the wisdom of those angels. And what is going to happen, that we're actually going to take their place up there, would have happened anyway as part of His eternal purpose. I don't think God would have left those angels with an inferior wisdom in charge of the heavenly places. I think He always meant to do that. Now the question is, well, if there hadn't been an angelic rebellion, okay, those angels might have voluntarily stepped down for the good of what God was doing there. But how would all of that have happened? How would you have had a body of Christ and all that? I don't know the answer to that because it didn't happen that way. So, and the Bible doesn't go to the trouble to tell us that. But making God's manifold wisdom known is something that is part of His eternal purpose. And I believe that, and we're going to talk just a bit about this more later today, but I do know that that's something that God intended to do from the beginning. Okay, for several weeks now we've been out of Romans chapter 12, and during that time I think we reviewed the necessary framework to actually get us back into Romans chapter 12 and verse 12, clearing up any problems that we may have had, hopefully bringing into clear focus everything about this issue of tribulations that we're going to be encountering, how God is dealing with us differently today than He did in His program with Israel. And so before we actually get to the Romans 12 verse, I just want to make one statement. Anytime Satan can get us operating out of something in Israel's program, anytime he can cause us to be uncertain about the doctrine, he has accomplished what his policy of evil is after. He wants us to get back under that program in some way. And so I just know that that is always going to be the case for us. I used to look back at the book of Galatians, and I know their problem was they went back under the law, and they were trying to accomplish all those things just like they were back in Israel's program. And I used to wonder, how could anybody go back under the law after they've seen what Paul's written in the book of Romans? But I have to tell you, the policy of evil is pretty clever. And I think what it does is it just starts with a little piece here, and then a little piece here, and then all that begins to add up. And so we have to always kind of keep our guard up on those kinds of things. Okay, so now, having said that, we're actually going to be in verse 12, but I want to read the entire sentence just to give us a context for this. This sentence is pretty long. It starts back in verse 9, and so here we go. Romans 12:9. Let love be without dissimulation. I'm sorry, I included 9, and actually that was a sentence on its own. It should have been, abhor that which is... Oh, I see it does. It continues in verse 9, so I was right after all. Forgive me. I was wrong because I thought I was wrong. Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. And I've talked to you about this from verse 10 now to verse 13, being one long sentence. And because that's one long sentence, I believe the context remains the same throughout that sentence. What has been the context up to this point? The context has been the relationship that we have with other members of this body, of this local assembly. And I believe that remains the context. And if I'm right about that, then when he's talking about not slothful in business, we're talking about the business of laboring with our Father in this local assembly. Now, having said that, I'm going to say that context now will run all the way down through verse 13. And as we get ready to look at it, and we are going to just turn there to verse 12, but as we get ready to turn over to verse 12, I need to correct something, or actually fine-tune something that was back up before that. Look back up in verse 9. Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. What I told you about that wasn't a bad thing, and it wasn't a wrong thing, but I don't think it was precisely to the point, and it kind of strayed out of our context a little bit. If you remember, what I told you was that we abhor that which is evil and cleave to that which is good. I talked about that as being the good and evil that happen in the lives of the other members of the assembly. And that's not a bad thing to do, but it's not precisely to the point. Because the godly love that is being generated in us, that godly love is actually being generated in us in two ways. First of all, for our Father's business, and secondly, to the other saints in our assembly. And the reason I do both of those is because, do you remember, I didn't back you all the way up, but do you remember why we don't think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think? If I could take you back to verse 3 just for a second. Why is it we don't think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think? Because God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. Remember that? And what did that mean? That He's dealt to every man the measure of faith.
That we all have the same job, the same. He's given us all the.
You're on the right track. We've all been charged with the responsibility to labor with Him in His business. And even though we may hold different offices in doing that, that's all working to do that, right? So if we've all been charged, look, if the reason that Ruby is important to me is because I know she also has been charged to work in my Father's business, that doesn't mean a thing to me unless I care something about the Father's business. Right? Because if I don't care about the Father's business, just because I know Ruby's supposed to be involved in that won't mean a hill of beans to me. So this thing starts out with getting our Father's norms and standards for what He values and esteems. What does He value and esteem? His business. What He's doing. And the fact that that's important to us, when we realize everybody in this room is a part of that, they become important to us by extension. See, this comes out of this. Do you see? Okay, so I just wanted to make that clear. Because now that we're going to get over here to verse 12, well, I'm backing you up, I'm sorry. Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. That, once again, because the context of this whole thing, because the Father's business and our relationship with the other saints is in this assembly. And if that's the context, and it is, if that's the context, then the abhorring of evil and the cleaving to good has to do with those things that are in this assembly. In other words, that lend themselves toward that success. I don't know if I put these on the PowerPoint. Let me just look. No, I guess I didn't. But here's what we have. What is evil? Let's talk about that definition just for a quick moment. I promise we won't dwell here. But when he talked about, abhor the evil. And that evil is something that meant to bring harm to. And so, how in the world could this assembly be harmed? This assembly is harmed by anything that hinders it from functioning as a body. And this assembly is harmed by its doctrine being corrupted. And this assembly is harmed when division is caused among its members. And this assembly is harmed, or evil comes to it, when our godly edifying is obstructed. You see all of those things. That would be the evil that we're to hate. I'm not saying that because something bad happens to Bob, I shouldn't feel badly about that, and you know, I don't wish that would have happened at all. But more to the point, and in the context of what we're talking about, I'm supposed to abhor the evil that may actually bring harm to this group becoming what they're supposed to be and being edified. And so if this group is going to be in that kind of danger, I abhor that. And on the other hand, I cleave to that which is good. What is good? Anything that promotes the function of this group as a body, that's a good thing. Anything that lends itself to godly edification, that's a good thing. Anything that causes the increase of that body, I will cleave to that. Do you see how that's more to the point? Okay, I just wanted to correct that, or actually take that further than I took it before, because that's really the thing that's in view for us here. Okay, so up to this point, and by the way, you could go through all of those, and we've been through them. This is an exhortation that contains 8 components that give us a kind of checklist to say, are these the kinds of things that are happening in you? Because they should be. If this doctrine has worked right, this ought to really, we ought to be able to look at that checklist, at the things in this exhortation and go, yeah, all that's working in me. So do we abhor those things that are detrimental to this assembly? Do we cleave to those things which are good? Here's the next one. Are we kindly affection to one another with brotherly love? Now, you may look at that and say, hey, there's always room for improvement, but we ought to be working on that. Here's the next one. In honor, preferring one another. And the next part of the exhortation, not slothful in business, talking about the business of the local assembly. Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. And now we come to the next one, rejoicing in hope. And that's really the verse now where we're trying to get to. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. And because we've gotten up to this place, these 3 issues of, and I'm just going to put them on the board because we're going to just have to look at them. Hope, tribulation, and prayer. Now what we're going to do today, folks, is very important. Because I realize if there's one area that people are struggling with, it's this issue of sonship prayer. And when 12 says continuing instant in prayer, people hear the kinds of things that we've been talking about and they say, well, what in the world am I supposed to pray for? You know, before I was praying for all these things to happen, and I just kind of had this idea in my mind. But if we're understanding this doctrine properly, then what are we praying for God to do? And I actually raised a couple of questions. I'm going to raise them today or in the second session. But what I need to do is I need to set something up by looking at this rejoicing in hope aspect that will help us understand this prayer issue. Because this really is a marvelous thing. And it fits perfectly with our doctrine. So I'm hoping to clear up any fuzziness with this. So let me just see if I can't get into the foundation work. When we're talking about rejoicing in hope, where in the world in Paul's epistles have we seen any hope that has been described to us just that way? Well, the first place we saw this is back in Romans chapter 5. Take a look. Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom also we have access by faith into this grace wherein we stand, and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Now, you remember what this verse 12 was? Rejoicing in hope. We saw that very phrase back in Romans chapter 5. Rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Now, we know what it means to rejoice. Well, maybe we don't. Can I just show you something interesting about that? What's the root word of rejoice? A little short word. Joy. Rejoice is really a compound word. Here's the first part, here's the second part, and the root word is joy. But if you R-E anything, what are you doing? You're doing it again and again. You're repeating. So you know what? You're repeating. In other words, when you first heard something, that was a hope. And if you're and that may give you joy. But as you rehearse that hope over and over, you know what? You're rejoicing. Do you see? That joy is coming back, that original joy is coming back to you again. So when he says rejoicing in hope, then you know you've already been shown something about this hope, right? Or you can't rejoice it. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the first place that we found that. And look what he says here. And rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Now here's the phrase that I want us to focus on. Rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And I went back to my notes in Romans 5, and as wonderful as they were, when I went back over there, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, I went back over and I said, what did I tell everybody back then about the glory of God? And you know what? I didn't tell you anything. And I thought, I wonder if that's unclear. If we rejoice in hope of the... Now, a hope, what kind of hope are we talking about here? Not like I wish something would happen, but it's a certain expectation, right? It's something we've been told that we're counting on. So we're rejoicing in the fact that we're counting on the glory of God. Well, now, I got to thinking, okay, now I need to define the glory of God, because the glory of God can be used in a number of different ways. Let me show you one right here. I'm sorry. Let me read the rest of this passage, and then I'll give you that. Let me back up. We rejoice in hope, and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Verse 3. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also. Do you see that? Knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. That's the very thing we started with. And hope maketh not ashamed, because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, which is given unto us. And so, this hope, I'm going to take you back now to verse 3, because, look, when Paul says, we glory in tribulations also. What does the word glory mean there? It actually means that we find pleasure. We exult. We glory in I don't want to say it in a bad way, but if you glory in something, what are you doing? Huh? Rejoicing. Okay, you are rejoicing about it. She's trying to flip that around. But give me a different word. If something has happened and you're glorying in that, what are you doing?
You're happy about it.
You're happy about it. Yeah. What else?
You're enjoying it.
Okay, you're enjoying it. Yeah.
Excited.
Okay. All right. Now we'll just leave that one right there. There is that glory. No, I'm not unhappy with those answers. Those are great. But there's a second way that the word glory gets used. And this is the glory. I'm going to just talk about it and then I'll show you the verse. This is the glory that is God's intrinsic glory. It is the glory that He possesses in and of Himself because of who He is. Now I need to show this to you, because once you realize... Are you familiar with the old Roman road plan of salvation where you use Romans 3:23? For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And I used to wonder, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? For they've come short of the glory of God. What are they? I used to wonder about that. What is that glory of God we've come short of over there? Specifically, what is that talking about? It is talking about God's intrinsic glory. And I need to show you. And because God has glory, automatically, because of who He is often given a title, the God of glory. Let me just show it. I'm going to walk you through this. Psalm 29:3. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. This is not an unusual title. Do you remember back over here in this Acts 1 through 8 extension of mercy period that Stephen is standing before the council and he's talking about some specific aspects of Israel's history? And as he does that, look what he says in Acts 7. Then said the high priest, because he actually made accusation against Stephen, and then said the high priest, are these things so? And he said, men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan. And he said unto him, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. And then off he goes. But notice how he starts that out. The God of glory appeared to Abraham. So when he's talking about, he's using this phrase. Why is he the God of glory? Because there is a glory that God Himself possesses by His very nature. There's a glory. And so what is that glory? What's that describing? And instead of telling it to you, I want to show it to you. I'm going to take you back to the book of Exodus. And this is when God is talking to Moses. And as He's talking to Moses and telling him what he wants to do as far as leading the children of Israel out, Moses is interested in one thing. Who's going to go do this with me? And God says, I'm going to send my presence to do this with you. I'm going to send my presence. Now, we know Aaron went, but Moses is really looking for a sidekick. God says, I'm going to send my presence. And there's a reason about that. There's something I want you to see. So let's pick this up. Exodus 33:12. And Moses said unto the Lord, see, thou sayest unto me, bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. You've given me this job of bringing the people out. I want to know who's going to help me with this. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And now verse 14, and he said, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. Now all I'm showing you at this point is, Moses wants to know who's going to go with me, and God says my presence is going to go with you. That really is going to be enough. Now, here's what Moses wants now, because he's uncertain. He says, I want you to show me your glory. This is going to get us to the heart of what the glory of God is. So here we go. Exodus 33:18. And he said, I beseech thee, this is Moses talking, show me thy glory. And here's God talking. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I'll be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I'll show mercy. Now you have to understand, this is before God ever has Moses lead those people out, right? This is important. You know what God is saying right here? This is, by the way, this is great for us. Because what God did is He said, I'm reserving the right to be gracious, to show grace, and to be merciful, to show mercy to whomever I want. And that's what He did with us. We weren't under a covenant, but you know what God did? He actually gave us all the benefits of the new covenant without putting us under that covenant because of that statement right there. But we're not the only ones that benefited from that. Let me tell you who else benefited. Israel did. Do you know why? They're going to go under a law. Does God know that? He does. They're going to go under a law. And are they going to keep that law? And if God deals with them strictly by the law, what's He going to be forced to do? Wipe them out. They're going to commit sufficient violation that God's going to have to exterminate the whole nation. So you know what He does? He gives Himself the right to be gracious and show mercy when He desires to, so He doesn't have to be bound by this law to wipe Israel out because of what He knows. Now, that's just a side issue there. But now, let's go back to this glory, and I'll make all my goodness pass before you, and I'll proclaim the name of the Lord before thee. So here we go, Exodus 34:5. And the Lord descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him, and proclaimed. Here's what God said. The Lord God, merciful and gracious. Doesn't that just come out of that statement he just made? Long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. And that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children unto the third and to the fourth generation. All of those things that you just saw as the Lord's proclaimed, He said, I'll proclaim the name of the Lord before thee. And then in verse 6, and the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, and here's what God does. Mercy, grace. I mean, these are these are adjectives. I'm just turning them into nouns. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering. What's another word you could use for that? A little shorter word. Patient. Abundant in goodness and truth. Keeping mercy for thousands. He's repeated mercy again. Forgiving iniquity. And here's what I've done. I've taken this last part here. By no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity. And that is a reference to God's justice. God's not going to clear the guilty. He is merciful. He will forgive. But He's not just going to just clear the guilty. He's going to visit the iniquity upon them. So you know what? Here you have all these things. He's merciful. He's gracious. He's long-suffering. He's good. He is truth. He's forgiving. And He's just. All those things. That's what He proclaimed before Moses. And that, folks, is the character and the attributes of God that constitutes His glory. That He is all of that wrapped up into one, and the shining forth of all of those attributes constitutes the glory of God. And when He says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, in other words, all that God is what constitutes His glory. Now, I'm going to keep going with this, but I just want you to look at something that happened with regard to this. Because as the Lord was passing by and proclaiming the name of the Lord, and thereby showing Moses His glory. Remember, that's what Moses said. Show me your glory. God says, you want to know what makes up my glory? And then He proclaims His name before Moses, and there's the things in that list. Let's take this up in verse 29. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. And then, verse 33, until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face to hide that, because that was spooky for them to look at. They were scared of that. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone, and Moses put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him. Now, Paul is going to recount this incident, and he's going to make a comparison about it. And I want you to notice that what he's going to call it. Look in 2 Corinthians 3:3. For as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in the fleshy tables of the heart. You see what he's comparing here? He's comparing the law of Moses with the grace that God is now using to deal with people. And such trust have we through Christ to Godward, that not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God, who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Now, that's the start of this comparison. Now, take it up in verse 7, the next verse. But if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones. Wait a minute. What did he call the law? The ministration of death. Let me just ask you a question. Was there anything wrong with the law itself? No. What was the problem?
No one could stand by.
The problem was nobody could accomplish the law perfectly. You couldn't. Therefore, the law brought what upon people? Death. So he calls it the ministration of death, written and engraven. By the way, why would you ever want to go back under that? Oh my goodness. But if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones, was glorious. Here's this word again. So that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance. Wait, what? His countenance is his face. What was happening to his face? Yeah. There was a light that shone from his face. And it was called the glory of his countenance. Which glory was to be done away. By the way, did Moses' face shine forever after that? No, it eventually did fade, right? That glory was to be done away. Do you see a comparison being made here? He's taken that old covenant and he's contrasted it with the new. And now he's talking about the glory of the old as compared to the glory of the new. And he's talking about, this is the law versus grace as a way of dealing with men. And look what he's going to say. This glory was done away. Not only that, but how shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather glorious? In fact, as we continue to read about this, he's going to talk about the way the glory of this exceeds the glory of that. Take a look at this. This is verse 9. For if the ministration, he doesn't call it death this time, he calls it the ministration of condemnation. The law condemned. If the ministry of condemnation be glory, and was it? It was. Moses' face even shone with it. Much more doth the ministration of righteousness exceed in glory. For even that which was made glorious had no glory in this respect by reason of the glory that excelleth. For if that which is done away was glorious, much more that which remaineth is glorious. Much more. Here's what Paul's saying. The law, it was glorious, but that glory, it wasn't permanent. It was done away. By the way, why was this one, why did the glory of the new, why did that exceed in glory? Let me ask you a question. How many people's faces shone back there? One guy. Did it shine forever? No. One guy, and it was temporary. Under this new glory, how many are affected? Every saint has access to that glory. And how long is that glory? Is it temporary? No, this is a forever glory. Do you see? I'm using that thing that we saw in Exodus in order for Paul to make the contrast to this. Now, this is a good place for us to, I think this is a good place. I stopped it on, I've given myself a deal there to say that this is the place that I need to stop, but in my notes, this is not the stopping place. But we'll stop here. So because now that you've got this, I just need to make one statement. We'll finish this session and then we'll come back and pick this up. The glory of God is the intrinsic glory that God has in and of Himself because of His character and His attributes, that all of those things, and by the way, we can't add to that glory and we can't diminish that glory. It's His. He already owns it. I mean, it's already part of what makes Him who He is. So we can't add to that. But now when we come back, I'm going to show you a third way that glory gets used, and that does have to do with us. And that's really what Paul is going to lead to here. So we'll stop.